At the bottom, the front door slammed loudly. Then familiar footsteps were heard on the stairs. Jennifer huddled under the blanket, her heart racing with fear in her chest. She already knew that in a minute her displeased husband would enter the room and start accusing her of all earthly sins. Since a terrible accident that left Jennifer confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life, her intuition had sharpened. And now, her ability to foresee didn't fail her. The steps echoed right outside her room, as if warning of another round of confrontation with her perpetually discontented husband. The next moment, the door swung open. Rick was clearly in a foul mood, evidenced by his heavy breathing. He flicked on the switch, flooding the room with bluish-white artificial light. He headed towards the bed and abruptly tossed aside the blanket under which his wife had been hiding. "Why are you hiding under the blanket like a little girl? Is that how a normal wife greets her husband coming home from work?" Jennifer stayed silent. She knew any word from her now would only worsen the situation. It was even dangerous, as from a distance she could smell the fresh scent of alcohol on him. But Rick wasn't satisfied with his wife's silence. He had decided earlier in the day to put an end to this dreary life and had a few drinks to muster up the courage. "I think I asked you a question that deserves a reasonable answer." There was no retreat for Jennifer, and she murmured softly, "What do you want to hear?" "Don't play dumb, Jennifer. You know perfectly well that this can't go on like this. I really can't take it anymore." A wave of resentment surged in the unhappy woman's soul. She could no longer contain herself. "Rick, I'm not forcing you to take care of me. I'm not even asking for it. I don't need your pity." The man laughed nervously. "You're so brave and decisive, aren't you? Wake up, woman. It's not for you to speak like this when you depend entirely on me, and I'm tired. Honestly, I'm incredibly tired of seeing that damn wheelchair every day. And I'm tired of seeing you in it too." Jennifer tried to pull the blanket around herself, while Rick slumped into a chair, clasping his strong hands together. "You can think whatever you want about me, but I really can't do this anymore. I had different plans for my life. I wanted a strong family, lots of kids, and you kept putting off this important matter. And now it's unlikely you'll ever become a mother." His remark cut deeply into Jennifer's heart. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Why are you like this, Rick? It's cruel and unfair. It was you who asked me not to rush into having a child. You even convinced me to terminate the pregnancy in our first year of marriage. Back then, all you cared about was getting promoted to department head. I listened to you, and now I regret it deeply. And yet, you still didn't get the promotion. You failed." Rick jumped up from the chair and stormed towards the bed where his immobilized wife lay. "So now you found courage, even in your condition, to say these things to me? And it's good that child didn't come into this world. Otherwise, on top of a crippled wife, I'd have to deal with a child too. If I had known earlier, or if some fortune teller had warned me of this horrible fate, I would never have married you. Rick, no one's forcing you to stay in this house. You're free as the wind. I have a good caregiver who handles everything perfectly. And as for fate, remember the old saying that no one in this life is safe from troubles and misfortunes." His anger flared as if stung in a sensitive spot. "Are you threatening me now?" "By no means, God forbid. I just want to remind you that misfortune can happen to anyone. And there's one more thing I want to say to you since we're on this topic. Why do you always shift the blame onto me? After all, it was due to your carelessness that I became disabled. Part of this is your fault." Jennifer hit him where it hurt most. Rick was afraid to admit even to himself that he did bear some responsibility for the car accident that happened almost 2 years ago. It was his distraction that had caused Jennifer not to fasten her seatbelt on that fateful day. As a result, she suffered a spinal injury in the collision with the minibus, while he escaped with minor fright and a few scratches. The guilt of knowing he played a part in the accident that left his wife disabled had tormented Rick for the past 2 years. The early days after Jennifer was discharged from the hospital were especially tough. She slept poorly at night and often moaned in pain, each cry of suffering echoing as remorse in Rick's soul. He suffered from guilt, although Jennifer had never blamed him for what happened. Today was the first time she had brought it up. But Rick didn't want to dwell on the past anymore. He wanted a new life, and his helpless wife was a constant reminder of his guilt, making him eager to rid himself of this irritating factor. As the argument gradually subsided, Rick decided to throw fresh wood onto the fire of their family scandal. With renewed passion, he provocatively asked, "You mentioned something about the house?" "Rick, I'm tired. Let's put this conversation off until tomorrow." "She's tired. And do you think I'm not tired? You loaf around all day, watch TV, hang out on social media. That's how I try to be useful, dear. Besides, I need social interaction to keep from going crazy in this house." Yeah, speaking of the house, that's what I wanted to ask about. Explain these hints." "No hints, because you know perfectly well that this is my house, meaning I'm the owner." "And if something bothers you?" Rick impatiently cut her off. "So I should just go to hell? Is that what you're trying to say?" They had bought this house when Jennifer's parents sold their spacious apartment and moved to the country. They were willing to do anything for their beloved daughter. So, when the question arose of where the young couple would live, they didn't hesitate for a second. Rick had no one to help him. They didn't even ask. "I've already told you everything on this matter, and I don't want to bring up this topic anymore," she said. "You're free to make your own decisions, but you have no moral right to complain to me." "Oh, I see." The man began to pace around the small room, overturning everything in his path. Jennifer was no longer afraid of him. She had expressed everything that had accumulated on her heart over the years. "Stop the tantrum, Rick. I wonder what kind of response you were expecting from me. You probably thought I would beg you to stay with me. No, darling, that will never happen. I am self-sufficient, despite my disability. By the way, I can financially support myself just fine." "You're joking. How long will your meager pension last?" Rick glared at her furiously, but Jennifer decided she wouldn't remain silent anymore. Why hadn't she asked the caregiver for help? Why all these scandals? "In addition to my pension, I have income. You reproached me a minute ago for spending days on social media. But this activity provides me with a small but stable income, so live off your own money. As for the house, dear, you've gone too far. Your plan won't work out. Owner, look at you talking like this. And where's my share? Anywhere but here. Talk to your parents about that." Jennifer looked at her husband, satisfied but also frightened as she watched his expression change. It was a low blow. Rick had grown up in a troubled family, and from a young age sought a secure, peaceful life. He spent some time in a boarding school before being taken in by his aunt. She became his guardian and helped him get on his feet. But he had seen his parents only once, and that meeting left a bitter impression on him. Jennifer had always spared his pride and never reminded him of his roots. Right now, his claims to part of the property had upset the woman. Mentioning her parents had enraged Rick. He grabbed the unfortunate woman with the blanket she had been using to cover her shivering body. The man's rough actions resonated throughout her entire body with intense pain. Jennifer screamed loudly, "Stop yelling. Your screams and moans are already getting on my nerves. Now you'll learn what property is and how you should talk to your husband." In the next moment, the woman found herself in a wheelchair. A bad feeling made her shudder. She suddenly realized that Rick had planned a terrible revenge for her. "Rick, please calm down. Let's discuss everything calmly tomorrow. Please, don't do something stupid that you'll regret later. If you want to leave, I won't stop you." Jennifer kept talking, trying to reason with the man, but Rick didn't listen to her. He effortlessly lifted the wheelchair with his wife and headed for the exit. With the same confident movement, he tossed his burden into the car's cabin. Jennifer continued to try to reach the conscience of the man she had lived with for almost 6 years. She had already guessed what punishment her loving husband had devised for her. "Rick, come to your senses. Don't do this. Shut up. I'll show you your real home now." The car raced at top speed along the deserted highway. A dark forest stretched on both sides of the road all the way to the horizon. The woman pondered possible escape routes, but her helplessness prevented her from carrying out any of them. About 10 minutes into the wild race along the nighttime road, the SUV abruptly slammed on the brakes. Jennifer didn't expect it, so she hit her head hard on the front seat's backrest. The wheelchair also lost stability, tipping over into the narrow space between the front and rear of the cabin. Rick jerked open the car door and dragged his wife out into the snow. A moment later, her wheelchair was also in the snowdrift. During this operation, Jennifer didn't make a sound. She was unconscious. Just in case, the man checked her pulse. "She's alive." "Well, that's good. You won't nag me anymore. Live, my dear, wherever you want, if you're lucky enough to survive." A cripple, and she thought she was something. To avoid his conscience nagging at him, Rick hurried to quickly flee the scene of the crime. Trying to drown out the inner voice that was trying to shout at his conscience, he cranked up the music to full volume. A beautiful female voice came from the speakers. The singer sang about a failed love and told off whoever had deceived her dreams. "And here's the complaints and whining," he suddenly yelled at the top of his voice. "You yourself, Jennifer, are to blame for everything. You shouldn't have provoked me. You shouldn't have mentioned my parents." But his soul's cry was met only by the singer, sending the complainer to hell from afar. In a rage, Rick struck the panel with all his might. When he got home, he drank himself into oblivion. In his sleep, he saw Jennifer alive and well, running away from him across a blooming meadow. In cold sweat, he jumped up in the middle of the night and impulsively rushed into the next room. But Jennifer's bed was empty, and a chilly wind was blowing through the room. The man remembered that in a fit of anger, he had opened the window when planning his own wife's elaborate execution. "What have I done? How could I treat someone like this?" Rick paced the room for several minutes, then dashed out into the yard. "I'll fix everything now. It's only been a little while. I'll make it. I'll definitely make it. I'll persuade Jennifer not to tell anyone." He tried to calm himself down, though he knew very well that a nearly naked disabled woman wouldn't survive without outside help and 20-degree frost. His terrible suspicion was confirmed when he reached the scene of the recent events. All that remained to remind him of what happened here were his footprints, nearly covered in snow, and a dent where he left his wife to die. Completing this sad picture was the wheelchair, still atop a massive drift. Rick roared like a wounded animal. "I'm scum, despicable. I'll never wash this sin away now. Jennifer, answer me." He wandered among the drifts for several hours, reaching the edge of the forest. He called for his wife, trying to find her traces in a pristine white blanket. The man couldn't understand where a woman unable to move on her own could have gone. Even if hungry beasts had dealt with her, there would still be traces. But around him reigned only white, cold silence. He returned home, frozen and deeply frightened. Of course, he retrieved the wheelchair from the car. He put it away as if she had never been there. He didn't understand why now, but he couldn't just throw it out. That would raise unnecessary suspicions. Dr. Leon Brown managed to settle all the matters at the district hospital almost overnight. On the desk in the duty room, there was still an impressive stack of patient medical histories that urgently needed prescriptions for the next day. The doctor stared at the stack for a long time, while his stomach loudly reminded him of the emptiness within that every living creature needs food. Leon Brown listened to the voice of his stomach, and to appease his vigilant conscience, said aloud, "I'll come in early tomorrow morning and fill everything out. What is this?" He lived alone, dedicating all his time to work and never managing to get everything done. The inner voice told him that he managed just fine with the patients, even more than necessary, but paperwork was always so difficult for him. Leon Brown once again promised himself that starting from tomorrow, he would definitely deal with all the paperwork strictly on time. He had arrived at the district center immediately after graduating from medical school, and now he had faithfully served the local healthcare for almost 10 years. The only downside was his unsettled personal life. None of the local brides caught his eye, so he spent his free time in his bachelor den, as he proudly called his one-room apartment. The local authorities allocated this housing to him when he, a young and promising doctor, came to work here. The local population was also pleased. The local grandmothers in particular expressed their emotions about it. "Finally, we have our own doctor, such a decent young man and attentive." They were shy only at first, but then Leon Brown became one of them. Many of them called him son and, of course, used his kindness and reliability. They came to the hospital to him, they went to him at home, they caught him when he came home from work. Someone needs advice, someone needs approval, and someone needs to look at it because it's impossible to come to a neighbor during working hours to sit with grandchildren. But the intricacies of medical ethics Leon Brown learned in childhood, because his father and mother were also representatives of this noble profession. His parents were very pleased when they found out that their son decided to follow in their footsteps. However, Leon Brown did not consider another option. He was completely devoted to his work and considered constant overtime normal. His permanent residence was not far away, just over 2 kilometers along the road crossing the forest massif. The frosty air invigorated and tuned him to positive thoughts. Sitting in the car, Leon Brown thought about his parents. I need to call Mom today. I keep forgetting due to work. Leon Brown thought to himself. Leon loved his parents dearly, but the hectic pace of life often caused him to forget to call. Sometimes his mother would call him instead, and then Leon would dutifully say, Mom, I was just about to call you. His mom would laugh, saying it wasn't nice to deceive elders, and lament that her son had worked himself to exhaustion. With this plan set for the evening, the doctor headed out onto the road. He didn't approve of reckless driving, and even on the deserted highway, he maintained an average speed. Extreme caution was required here, as wildlife often visited human settlements without hesitation. Winter was the most favorable time for such visits. Considering that the road was only illuminated by natural sources like stars and the moon, Leon had to watch the road ahead very carefully. As Leon Brown covered most of the way, he noticed a dark object ahead on the left side of the road. What's that? Maybe someone hit an elk? Let's take a look. Being a responsible local doctor, he stopped without hesitation. When he realized that the unidentified object was a young woman, his professional instincts immediately kicked in. He leaned over the stranger and noticed a faint cloud near her mouth. She's alive, that's good. Let's try to revive her. Leon gently patted the woman's cheeks, but this ancient method didn't work. The injured woman briefly opened her eyes and whispered with frozen lips, It's very cold, I can't feel my hands. Hang in there, we'll warm you up and get you back. The doctor took out his mobile phone from his pocket. This is Leon. I was driving and found an unconscious woman on the roadside. Prepare everything necessary for resuscitation. I'll bring the patient in about 15 minutes. Leon Brown carefully lifted the woman onto his arms and placed her on the back seat of his SUV. He noticed she was quite young and definitely not someone who had fallen into bad habits or excessive drinking. Her face was very lovely, just a bit tired. Well then, let's go. I've already called her parents. It's true what they say, isn't it? God laughs at our plans and tries to give us extraordinary situations. Today, dreaming about a warm bed is out of the question. Well, a good doctor will do anything for their neighbor. It's just that most of the people in this circle are complete strangers to me. I hope someday I'll be rewarded for all the good deeds up there. Dr. Brown pondered the meaning of life all the way back to his own hospital. The nurse on duty in the emergency room was surprised to see him carrying a living burden in his arms. Leon Brown, where did you find her? She's hardly wearing anything. How hasn't the poor thing frozen yet? The girl ran ahead of him, opening doors. They passed through the emergency room and headed straight to the box outside the ICU. It's easily explained. She happened to be there just a little before me. If I had been driving a bit faster, I probably wouldn't have noticed her. Leon Brown was now even afraid to think about what would have happened if he hadn't noticed the girl. Most likely on that deserted road, no one else would have seen her either. And judging by her condition, she didn't have much time left. He carried her and understood that the option of alcohol intoxication, which would explain everything, was completely ruled out. Jennifer spent over a month in the hospital. The first week, she was in intensive care. Hypothermia had affected her already weak health and pneumonia had set in. Leon Brown visited the strange patient every day. At first, his visits were purely symbolic, but they soon turned into a peculiar ritual. Jennifer was still very weak, but a smile always appeared on her lovely face when her savior came. The nurses briefly explained to her how she ended up in the hospital, so the woman kept repeating words of gratitude endlessly. "Thank you, Leon Brown." "Jennifer, sometimes I feel like those 3 words are the only ones you know. Do I really resemble Ellie the cannibal that much?" Jennifer laughed, catching herself realizing she hadn't laughed so sincerely in a long time. That was before the accident, or maybe even earlier. There might be some resemblance, although your mentioned heroine had quite voluptuous curves. The man began to scrutinize the patient, but he did so playfully, which amused the sick woman. "I promise, doctor, as soon as I recover, I'll definitely gain weight. I'll eat for 2. All right, I'll hold you to that promise." Non-compliance carries a severe punishment. And by the way, Jennifer, you can start getting up and walking little by little. The woman looked embarrassed and lowered her eyes. Leon Brown realized he had said something inappropriate for the patient. "Is something wrong? Are you unhappy?" Jennifer looked up at him, her eyes quickly filling with tears. "I'm very grateful, doctor, that I ended up with you, but I can't take you up on your offer." "What do you mean you can't?" She shrugged. "I can't because I can't walk, not at all." Suddenly it clicked in his mind like a puzzle finally coming together. Something had seemed odd to him during his examinations of Jennifer. She had never gotten up, he always examined her lying down. He had mainly focused on her arms, and hadn't noticed. He couldn't even imagine. Jennifer spent over an hour telling the doctor about the accident, her husband, and her recent argument with Rick. The man's face changed visibly, anger rising in his cheeks. The woman finished her story at the point where she lost consciousness. She couldn't remember anything more. "I can't even say how long I lay in the snow. But when my husband was dragging me down the stairs in a wheelchair, I managed to look at the clock. It was 8:15. Jennifer shivered, her memories disturbing her. It felt like she was plunging back into that wave of fear again. "And I found you almost at 9 in the evening. So you were lying in the cold for almost half an hour. What kind of monster does one have to be to do that to a helpless person?" "Jennifer, you may be upset with me, but I have to report this incident to the police." "Such things cannot be forgiven." Jennifer pleaded. "Please, don't do this. It's just a family quarrel." "What are you talking about, Jennifer? This scumbag left you to die, and you're defending him? His actions are equivalent to me, for instance, not helping someone who feels unwell on the street. Just passing by. Do you understand that this is a crime?" "I understand, but I don't think you really." "What are you saying? I found you not 5 minutes later, and I didn't encounter any car on the way that could have been chasing after you. How can't you understand that another 15 minutes and it would have been too late for you? Nothing would have helped. Do you understand? He drove you out to that road, intentionally. Cars rarely pass by there, and you would definitely have perished. This man deserves to be punished, and you won't change my mind." At the local police station, they were very surprised when Dr. Leon reported the incident. The young lieutenant blushed with excess emotion. Well, such coincidences happen in life. Now it was the visitor's turn to be puzzled. "I don't understand you, Lieutenant. What's so hard to understand here? This woman's husband submitted a report to us a week ago claiming his wife disappeared. She vanished from their home in an unknown direction. Doctor, there's another intriguing detail. The applicant's wife is disabled." The law enforcement officers seemed eager to impress, but Leon remained impassive. The young officers sighed heavily and continued. "I see you're well informed. Well, as a doctor, you should know about these things. There's one more detail that caught our attention when we visited the scene. A wheelchair." The doctor was puzzled. "What wheelchair?" "A good one, a modern electric wheelchair. Very expensive." "So, when we visited the distraught husband, we found this transportation device right on the ground floor of his house belonging to the missing woman. That struck me immediately. How can a disabled person disappear when their wheelchair remains at home? Of course, she could have been abducted while her husband was at work. But then the motive isn't clear. It's quite a puzzle. But now everything seems to make sense. I won't hide it. We started thinking the husband might have harmed his wife and hidden the body. Young man, what disturbing thoughts you have. Cute, it's not good for your health. Leon was slightly taken aback by the cynicism of the law enforcement officer. The lieutenant realized he had said too much and apologized in an explanatory tone. It's part of our job. You doctors have your own quirks too. You diagnose someone sitting next to you on a bus just by looking at them. We tried to explore all possible scenarios to uncover the truth. The loquacious lieutenant seemed ready to elaborate further, but Leon Brown glanced pointedly at his watch. The officer blushed again and began apologizing once more. I'm sorry to take up your time, but thank you, doctor, for your assistance. If all our citizens were as responsible as you about what happens around them, we would have order everywhere. Leon really liked the young lieutenant. He admired his outlook on life too. He thought to himself that this constantly blushing young man was right. If each of us did our duty conscientiously and helped our neighbors, harmony would reign in the world. After visiting the police station, Leon Brown decided to visit one more place. Initially, he thought he wouldn't do it, but he couldn't resist. He wanted to look into the eyes of the person who could do such a thing. The person who had callously dumped a helpless woman in the snow and returned to her house to continue living. He got into his car and drove to the house where his patient lived. A tall, pleasant-looking blond man opened the door. Who are you looking for? Are you Rick? Responding to a question with another question, the visitor asked. The homeowner became wary. Yes, what about it? I'm the attending physician of your wife, Jennifer. Rick's face turned ashen gray, and he broke out in a sweat on his forehead. She's alive, and I hope will be well. At least, I'll do everything in my power to ensure that. As they say, we'll live despite our enemies. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. And you're not very hospitable, keeping your guest at the doorstep. Clearly, you weren't pleased to hear that your wife, left out in the cold by you, survived. Am I right? Unexpectedly, Rick went on the offensive. Doctor, what business is it of yours? Why are you poking around in my soul with your sterile fingers? Who asked you to meddle in my family affairs? You don't have a family. Jennifer will never forgive you. And that's right. How can anyone forgive something like that? And anyway, I don't know if you care, but I've just come from the police station. Now justice will deal with you. Leon Brown turned to leave. It was unpleasant for him to even see this trembling creature that outwardly resembled a man. But at the last moment, he changed his mind. He turned back to the homeowner and then pushed him towards the door. You know, scum, I came here to smash your face in. But then I realized I don't want to dirty my hands on such a piece of filth. I'm just surprised by one thing. How does the earth bear creatures like you? Rick didn't respond anymore. How many times had he imagined that something like this could happen someday? But now he understood he wasn't ready. He wasn't ready to go to prison, even for a short time. 2 years passed. Jennifer thought less and less about her first failed marriage. She had almost forgotten spending several years in a wheelchair. Leon Brown introduced her to a renowned professor who had taught when he was in college. The professor examined and tapped the young woman's defiant body for a long time. Satisfied with the examination, the professor optimistically declared, "Everything looks fine, dear. You're incredibly lucky with the injury you sustained." It was the first time Jennifer had heard such a conclusion from a specialist, but the beacon of medicine didn't hesitate to present her case. Forgive me for my unusually harsh language, but there's no other way to put it. Yes, you're lucky. Your precious spine is intact, which means you have a chance to learn to walk again. But first, you'll need a very complex operation, and you won't have to raise money and travel to Israel because there's a wonderful doctor in Novosibirsk. He's a true magician. He's put hundreds of patients back on their feet who never thought they'd walk again. That's what awaits you. Are you satisfied, dear? Very. Of course, there were complex operations and a body-squeezing brace, but the old professor's prognosis proved to be accurate. Now Jennifer couldn't imagine how not long ago she could only move around in a wheelchair. She enjoyed her reflection in the mirror. From somewhere deep in the house, Leon's voice could be heard. Are you ready? It's not good to be late. Jennifer smiled at her reflection. How happy she was. Just a few years ago, the girl was sure that all the good was behind her, and ahead lay only darkness, pain, and waiting for the end. We'll definitely make it on time because I'm ready to shine and impress your friends. The only downside is I can't show off in high heels, although I really want to. Leon Brown sneaked up behind her and embraced her around the waist. You look gorgeous in this dress and those cute shoes. They're so much like Cinderella's. And heels? They're relics of the past, trying to make legs longer for those who don't need it. Trust me, not as a doctor but as a man, you don't need heels. You have beautiful legs. The best. Believe me, everyone will envy you. You're spot on because after meeting you, a real fairy tale began for me. It's hard to believe such things can happen in real life. Jennifer wanted to add something more, but the home phone rang insistently. She was surprised. I wonder who that could be. I forgot I even had this antique in the house, and it unexpectedly spoke up. She picked up the receiver. As she listened to the unseen caller, her expression changed, and it changed for the worse right before his eyes. It darkened visibly. Leon Brown grew concerned. What happened? You look pale. Yes, Leon, something's happened. Rick had an accident. They'll probably be calling you soon. You're the best doctor in town, and it sounds serious there. Jennifer couldn't finish her sentence as Leon's mobile phone buzzed. Leon Brown, please come urgently. We have a very critical patient. Craniocerebral trauma, multiple fractures. In short, the full package. All right, I'll be there in 5 minutes. Get thee all ready. Without saying a word, Leon Brown gathered himself and soon the door slammed shut behind him. Jennifer sat in stunned silence for a long time. She couldn't make sense of her feelings because her heart felt empty. It had all died inside after her beloved had taken her into the woods, dooming her to certain death. And now he was in trouble himself. But she felt no sympathy for him. Yet there was no satisfaction either in knowing that karma had come back around to him. She knew Leon Brown would do everything possible to save Rick. Simply because right now, Rick was just a patient to him, just a person in need of help. She knew her husband well enough that he would never deny assistance or provide it begrudgingly because of what had happened. Rick resembled a mummy, his entire body encased in plaster and bandages. But he heard the door creak open quietly at first, then heard someone's light, almost weightless steps. He struggled to turn his head toward the sound. Before him stood Jennifer. Hello, Rick. How are you feeling? The patient raised a thumbs up. Jennifer noticed a solitary tear trickle down his cheek. With reluctant lips, Rick whispered, Thank you, Jennifer, for coming. Forgive me if you can. You see, your words came true. No one is immune to misfortune, and I've had my full share. Everything will be all right. You'll recover, and you'll meet someone who makes you happy. And both of us will forget this nightmare. I've forgiven you truly. Now everything's fine for me, and I no longer hold any grudge against you. Jennifer left, and Rick stared at the door where she had disappeared for a long time. He felt like that door had cut him off from his past life. Maybe Jennifer was right, and there was still plenty of good ahead.